The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed twice as Margaret Thompson smoothed the credit card statement on her kitchen table, her reading glasses catching the afternoon light streaming through the bay window. The paper trembled slightly, not from her 58-year-old hands, which remained steady from years of kneading bread and tending her garden, but from the peculiar charge highlighted in yellow, Tiffany & Company, minus $3,847. She set down her lavender tea, the ceramic cup meeting the saucer with a decisive click that seemed to echo through the pristine kitchen. Robert hadn't given her jewelry in 5 years. Their anniversary had passed 2 months ago, with nothing more than a rushed dinner at the country club, Robert checking his phone between courses while she pushed salmon around her plate. The October sun cast long shadows across the marble countertops as Margaret picked up her phone. Her fingers, still bearing the simple gold band Robert had placed there 32 years ago, navigated to the credit card app with surprising efficiency for someone who'd only recently embraced technology. 3 more Tiffany charges appeared over the past 4 months. A hotel charge at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, twice monthly, always on Thursdays when Robert claimed to have late meetings. Restaurant bills at places he'd never taken her. Thursday golf with clients, she thought, remembering his words from just this morning as he'd grabbed his coffee, barely looking at her in his rush to leave. The coffee maker gurgled, preparing his usual dark roast that would now go cold on the warmer. Margaret's reflection caught her eye in the kitchen window, silver threading through auburn hair. She still kept long laugh lines that had deepened into something else these past years. When had she stopped looking closely at herself? When had Robert stopped looking at all? The back door opened with its familiar creak. "Mom?" Jennifer's voice rang out, followed by the click of designer heels on hardwood. "Are you home? I need to borrow your pearl necklace for the Hamilton wedding this weekend." Margaret folded the statement carefully, sliding it beneath the stack of Southern Living magazines she'd stopped reading months ago. "In the kitchen, sweetheart." Jennifer breezed in, all 30 years of her radiant with the confidence that comes from never wanting for anything. Her engagement ring, 2 carats, princess cut, caught the light as she reached for an apple from the bowl Margaret kept perpetually filled. "You look tired, Mom." Jennifer barely glanced up from her phone, thumbs flying across the screen. "You should try that new spa downtown. Though honestly, at your age, I'm not sure how much they can really do." The casual cruelty of the comment might have stung more if Margaret hadn't just discovered her husband's betrayal. As it was, she found herself studying her daughter with new eyes. When had Jennifer become so dismissive, so entitled? "Your father's working late again tonight," Margaret said, testing the words. Jennifer's thumbs paused for just a fraction of a second. "Yeah, he mentioned that to Michael. Big project deadline or something." "On a Thursday?" This time, Jennifer looked up, her perfectly shaped eyebrows drawing together. "Is that weird? Dad always works late." Margaret smiled, the expression feeling foreign on her face. "No, of course not. The pearls are in my jewelry box, top drawer." As Jennifer's heels clicked up the stairs, Margaret pulled out the credit card statement again. Her phone buzzed, a text from Robert. "Don't wait up, client dinner running late." It was 3:47 p.m. She walked to his home office, a room she rarely entered. The space smelled of leather and his cologne. Tom Ford, she'd bought it for him last Christmas. His laptop sat closed on the mahogany desk. Margaret had never snooped in 32 years of marriage, had never felt the need to. Trust, she'd always believed, was the foundation of marriage. The laptop password was their anniversary date. Of course it was. His email inbox loaded slowly, each message appearing like evidence in a case she hadn't known she was building. Work emails, golf club newsletters, and then Catherine Sullivan. Margaret's hand stilled on the mouse. Catherine, the 34-year-old project manager at Robert's construction firm. Blonde, Harvard MBA, had laughed a little too long at Robert's jokes at the company Christmas party. The email started professionally 8 months ago. By month 3, the tone had shifted. By month 5, they included hotel confirmations. The latest, from this morning, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wearing the necklace you bought me." Margaret closed the laptop with deliberate care. From upstairs, she could hear Jennifer on the phone, her voice carrying through the old house's thin walls. "Yeah, I'm at Mom's. God, this place is like a time capsule. I cannot wait until—" The voice dropped to a whisper. Until what? The grandfather clock chimed 4 times. Michael would be arriving soon. He always stopped by Thursday afternoons, supposedly to check on her, but really to raid her refrigerator and do his laundry. Her children had fallen into predictable patterns, as reliable as the seasons in her garden. She returned to the kitchen and began preparing dinner with mechanical precision. Chicken marsala, Robert's favorite. Her hands moved independently of her mind, muscle memory from thousands of meals prepared over decades. Salt, pepper, dredge in flour, the cast-iron skillet, her mother's, heated on the stove. Her phone buzzed again. This time, Michael, be there in 20. Dad working late again? Again. Such a small word to carry such weight. Margaret's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Yes," she finally typed. "Your father has his priorities." The chicken sizzled as it hit the pan, the sound sharp and angry in the quiet kitchen. She opened a bottle of Marsala wine, the cork releasing with a satisfying pop. She poured a generous amount into the pan, then a more generous amount into a crystal glass for herself. The wine was sweet and strong, coating her throat with artificial warmth. "Mom?" Jennifer stood in the doorway, the pearl necklace draped over her palm. "These are beautiful. Dad really knew how to pick jewelry back in the day." She laughed, the sound tinkling and false. "Though his taste has definitely evolved." Margaret's hand tightened on the wine glass. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing, just men his age sometimes go through phases, you know? Midlife crisis or whatever." Jennifer waved her hand dismissively, already turning away. "Thanks for these. I'll bring them back Sunday." The front door opened and Michael's voice boomed through the house. "Something smells amazing! Mom, you're the best." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, still wearing his suit from the office, Robert's office where he'd started working a year ago. His smile was bright, boyish, the same one that had melted her heart since he was 2 years old. "Hey, Mom." He kissed her cheek, then grabbed a piece of bread from the basket. "Dad's not home yet?" "Working late." The words came out flat. Michael exchanged a quick glance with Jennifer. "Right, the Henderson Project." "Is that what it's called?" Margaret asked, turning back to the stove. "Yeah, big commercial development. Dad's been putting in crazy hours on it." Michael loosened his tie, settling into his usual chair at the breakfast nook. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." Margaret added mushrooms to the pan, watching them slowly brown. "Oh?" "Dad mentioned he's been thinking about the future. You know, estate planning and stuff." Michael's voice was carefully casual, making sure everything's properly structured for tax purposes. "How thoughtful of him." Margaret took another sip of wine. "Yeah, well, you know Dad. Always planning ahead." Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "He wants to make sure the business stays in the family. Protect the assets." "From what?" Margaret asked. Michael looked up, surprised by the edge in her voice. "Just, you know, general protection. Makes sense to be careful." Jennifer had drifted back into the kitchen, perching on a bar stool. "Michael's right, Mom. Estate planning is super important. You and Dad aren't getting any younger." Margaret turned to face both of her children. They sat there in her kitchen, the kitchen where she'd made their birthday cakes and helped with homework and kissed away tears, discussing her mortality with the casual indifference of stockholders reviewing a portfolio. "Your father and I are only in our late 50s, she said quietly. "Right, but that's when you need to start thinking about these things," Jennifer said, examining her manicured nails, "before any complications arise." "Complications." Margaret repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. The garage door rumbled open. Robert was home, early for once. "Dad's here," Michael announced unnecessarily, straightening in his chair like a soldier preparing for inspection. Robert's footsteps were heavy on the garage stairs. He entered the kitchen bringing the smell of cologne, too much of it, and something else, perfume, floral and young and nothing Margaret had ever worn. "Smells delicious in here." He moved to kiss Margaret's cheek, a rehearsed gesture that she turned away from, busying herself with the stove. "You're home early," she observed. "Meeting ended sooner than expected." Robert's lie was smooth, practiced. He grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, the bottle hissing open. "Kids, good to see you both." "Hey, Dad," they chorused, and Margaret heard in their voices a warmth that had been absent when they'd greeted her. "Michael was just telling me about your estate planning," Margaret said, adding cream to the pan with unnecessary force. Robert shot Michael a look, quick, but Margaret caught it. "Just preliminary thoughts, nothing urgent." "No?" Margaret plated the chicken with architectural precision. "At our age, I'd think it would be very urgent." She set the plates down harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a judge's gavel. "Mom, are you okay?" Jennifer asked, though her eyes were on her phone screen. Margaret sat down, surveying her family. Her husband, who'd shared her bed for 3 decades, but now shared it with someone else. Her children, who carried her DNA but seemed to have inherited none of her values. When had they all become strangers? "I'm fine," she said, cutting into her chicken with surgical precision. "Just thinking about the future." Robert's fork paused midway to his mouth. "What about it?" Margaret smiled, the expression sharp as the knife in her hand. "Oh, just wondering what it holds? You never really know people, do you? Even the ones you think you know best." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Michael cleared his throat. "So, Dad, how's the Henderson project going?" Robert launched into a detailed explanation that Margaret didn't listen to. She was thinking about Catherine Sullivan, about pearl necklaces and Thursday afternoons, and the way her children had glanced at each other when she'd mentioned their father working late. They knew. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The glances, Jennifer's comments about jewelry and midlife crises, Michael's careful casualness about estate planning. They knew about the affair. Her wine glass trembled as she set it down. "Mom?" Michael's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You've gone pale." "Just tired," she managed. "I think I'll go lie down." She stood, leaving her barely touched dinner on the table. As she passed Robert's chair, his hand reached out to touch her arm. "Margaret?" She pulled away. "Enjoy your dinner. I'm sure you've worked up an appetite." She climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her bedroom now, she supposed, and closed the door. From below, she could hear the muffled sound of conversation resuming, punctuated by Jennifer's bright laugh. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed she'd made that morning with hospital corners, the way Robert liked it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, then noticed it contained a photo. The image was slightly blurry, taken in what looked like a restaurant. Robert and Catherine Sullivan, his hand on hers across a candle-lit table. But it wasn't the intimate pose that made Margaret's blood run cold. It was the couple at the next table, partially visible in the background. Jennifer and her fiancé, David. They were looking directly at Robert and Catherine, and Jennifer was smiling. Another text appeared. "Thought you should know. Your daughter was there last month. She saw everything and said nothing. A friend." Margaret stared at the phone until the screen went dark. Downstairs, she could hear Michael laughing at something Robert said. The sound was foreign now, belonging to strangers who happened to live in her house. She opened her laptop and began searching for divorce lawyers, her fingers steady on the keys. But as she typed, a different thought began to form. Divorce would be expected, conventional. It would divide the assets Robert was so eager to protect, give him an excuse to start fresh with Catherine, leave her children free to continue their lives unburdened by guilt. Number. They deserved something more creative, something that would teach them the weight of betrayal. Margaret closed the laptop and walked to her jewelry box. The pearls Jennifer had borrowed lay coiled like a sleeping snake. She picked them up, feeling their cool weight, remembering when Robert had given them to her for their 10th anniversary, back when jewelry had meant love instead of guilt. She returned them to their velvet box and locked it in the safe. Jennifer wouldn't be wearing them to the wedding after all. Small victories, but Margaret was just getting started. The grandfather clock chimed 8 times as Margaret stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the garden she'd cultivated for 20 years. The roses were in their final bloom, their petals tinged with brown at the edges. Tomorrow she would cut them back, preparing them for winter. Plants, she'd learned, often grew back stronger after being pruned to their roots. Downstairs, the front door closed as the children left. Robert's footsteps were on the stairs, approaching with the confidence of a man who believed his secrets were safe. Margaret turned from the window, her reflection in the dark glass showing a woman she barely recognized, someone harder, someone with secrets of her own. The bedroom door opened. "Feeling better?" Robert asked, already unbuttoning his shirt, the gesture so familiar it might have been comforting if Margaret hadn't known whose perfume clung to the fabric. "Much better," Margaret said. "In fact, I feel like a completely different person." Robert paused, perhaps hearing something in her tone. "The kids are worried about you." "Are they?" Margaret moved past him toward the bathroom. "How thoughtful of them." "Margaret, is something wrong?" She stopped in the doorway, not turning around. "What could possibly be wrong, Robert? We have such a perfect life, such a loving, honest family." She closed the bathroom door before he could respond, turning on the shower to drown out any attempt at conversation. In the mirror, her reflection stared back. A 58-year-old woman who'd given everything to people who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness. But obstacles, Margaret thought as she stepped into the scalding water, could be more dangerous than anyone realized, especially when they decided to stop being passive and start being deliberate. Tomorrow she would begin. 7 days had passed since Margaret discovered the truth about her family. 7 days of performing the role of oblivious wife and mother while documenting everything with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. The October air had turned sharp, matching the edge that now lived permanently in her chest. Margaret sat in Grace Chen's law office, surrounded by glass and steel that reflected the Dallas skyline. The coffee had gone cold in her hands, but she held it anyway, needing something to anchor her as Grace reviewed the documents spread across the conference table. "This text exchange between Jennifer and Michael is particularly damning," Grace said, adjusting her reading glasses. Her professional composure cracked slightly. "They're discussing your husband's affair like they're planning a dinner party." Margaret leaned forward to read Jennifer's message from 3 months ago. "Dad's little midlife crisis might actually work in our favor. Mom would never leave him anyway. She's too old to start over. As long as he keeps it quiet until the estate planning is done, we're golden." Michael's response: "Agreed. Mom's got no idea what the business is actually worth. Dad promised me VP once everything's structured right. Just need to keep Mom from rocking the boat." "How did you get these?" Grace asked gently. "Family phone plan," Margaret said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm the account administrator. Robert never thought I'd check the cloud backup." Grace made a note on her legal pad. "And this email about the trust restructuring?" Margaret pulled up another document on her laptop. "Robert's been moving assets for the past year. The construction business, the investment properties, even our vacation home in Colorado. Everything's being shifted into trusts that name the children as beneficiaries. I'm listed as a nominal trustee with no actual control. When were you planning to tell me about this?" Margaret had asked the question rhetorically, but Grace answered anyway. "Based on this documentation, never. You were supposed to sign papers thinking it was routine estate planning." Grace's expression darkened. "Margaret, this is financial abuse. He's systematically removing your access to marital assets while maintaining an affair." The office door opened, and Grace's assistant appeared. "Mrs. Chen, your 2 o'clock is here." "Give me 5 minutes," Grace said, then turned back to Margaret. "What do you want to do? We can file immediately? Freeze the assets?" "No." Margaret's interruption was soft but firm. "Not yet. I need more time." Grace studied her for a long moment. "You're planning something?" I'm planning justice. Margaret stood, gathering her papers with methodical precision. Divorce would be too simple, too clean. They're expecting me to either never find out or to react predictably if I do. Tears, threats, maybe throwing Robert's clothes on the lawn. They're not expecting this. She held up her phone, showing Grace a photo from last night's family dinner. They all looked perfect. Robert in his golf shirt, Jennifer and David laughing at something on his phone, Michael raising a beer toward the camera. Margaret stood slightly apart, smiling, playing her role. What they don't know, Margaret continued, is that I've already started. The vacation home? I've rented it out for the next 6 months through a property management company, with the income going to a separate account Robert doesn't know exists. The construction business, I've been having coffee with Tom Morrison. Grace's eyebrows rose. Morrison Construction? Robert's biggest competitor? Tom's wife died of cancer 2 years ago. He understands what it feels like to be betrayed by life. He's very interested in some information I have about Robert's bid practices. Margaret's smile was sharp, all perfectly legal information that a wife might overhear over 32 years. Margaret, be careful. Revenge can consume— It's not revenge, Margaret interrupted. It's justice. There's a difference. She left Grace's office and drove to the one place she could think clearly, her sister Diane's apartment in Uptown. Diane answered the door in paint-splattered jeans, her art studio visible behind her. You look different, Diane said immediately, studying Margaret's face. Harder? I am different. Margaret moved past her into the familiar chaos of Diane's space, canvases stacked against walls, brushes in coffee cans, the smell of turpentine and possibility. I need your help. Diane poured wine without asking, the kind of cheap red that Robert would have sneered at, but that tasted like freedom. Margaret told her everything, watching her sister's expression shift from shock to rage to something like pride. The children knew? Diane's voice was dangerous. Jennifer and Michael knew? For over a year. Margaret took a long sip of wine. They discussed it in a group chat they didn't realize I could access. Jennifer called me dead weight. Michael said I was— She consulted her phone, reading directly, basically just a housekeeper at this point. Dad deserves some happiness. Diane threw her wine glass against the wall. It shattered spectacularly, leaving a red stain like blood spatter on the white paint. Diane! I'll clean it later. Her sister's eyes blazed. Those ungrateful little— You gave up everything for them. Your career, your dreams, your entire identity. I know. Margaret's calm seemed to unnerve Diane more than tears would have. That's why what I'm planning has to be perfect. Will you help me? What do you need? Margaret pulled out a list, written in her careful handwriting. Information. You still have connections in the charity circuit. I need to know about the Thompson Family Foundation, specifically who actually controls it and where the money goes. Diane's eyes gleamed. Robert's precious tax shelter? Oh, I can do better than that. Patricia Hendricks is on the board. She owes me a favor from when I kept quiet about her husband's gambling problem. Margaret's phone buzzed, Jennifer calling. Hi, sweetheart, Margaret answered, her voice perfectly normal. Mom, where are you? I stopped by the house. Running errands. Did you need something? Dad wanted me to grab some papers from his office. Something about the estate planning stuff we discussed. Margaret's jaw clenched. Oh? What kind of papers? Just some signatures he needs. He said you'd already signed them, but he needs the originals. The lies came so easily to them. Margaret wondered how many times she'd been lied to before, too trusting to notice. They're in his desk, top drawer, Margaret said. She'd moved them there this morning, after making copies of everything. Jennifer, can I ask you something? Sure, Mom, but I'm kind of in a rush. Are you happy? With David? With your life? Jennifer's laugh was tinny through the phone. Of course I'm happy. Why wouldn't I be? David's family is loaded. We're having a huge wedding next spring, and Dad's setting us up with a trust fund. Life is perfect. And that's enough? Money? Mom, you're being weird. Look, I know you're going through menopause or whatever, but try not to get all philosophical on us, okay? It's exhausting. The line went dead. Margaret stared at the phone, marveling at how a child she'd carried for 9 months, whose fever she'd sat up with, whose dreams she'd encouraged, could dismiss her so completely. "What did she say?" Diane asked. "That I'm exhausting." Margaret laughed, the sound bitter. 30 years of devotion and I'm exhausting. Her phone rang again, Michael this time. "Mom, Jennifer says you're acting strange." I asked if she was happy. "Yeah, that's weird. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you should see someone. Dr. Patterson is good with women's issues." Women's issues. As if betrayal and abandonment were hormonal. "I'm fine, Michael. Just contemplating the value of family." "Right. Well, Dad needs you to sign some papers tonight. It's important for the business." "Of course it is." Margaret ended the call and turned to Diane. "I need to go home. They're accelerating their timeline." "Margaret, be careful. If they suspect..." "They don't suspect anything." To suspect, they'd have to believe I'm capable of independent thought. Margaret gathered her things. "Can you get me that information about the foundation?" "Give me 3 days." Margaret drove home through familiar streets that now felt foreign. Every landmark held a memory that had been retroactively poisoned. The park where she'd taught the children to ride bikes, had Robert been having affairs even then? The restaurant where they'd celebrated anniversaries, how many times had he taken Catherine there? The house was quiet when she arrived. Robert's car was gone, but there was a Mercedes she didn't recognize in the driveway. Margaret parked and walked in through the garage, moving silently through her own home. Voices carried from Robert's office. "Need her signature tonight. Once this is done, the assets are protected." Robert's voice. "You're sure she won't question it?" An unfamiliar male voice. "Margaret doesn't question anything. She's simple. Sweet, but simple." "And if she finds out about Catherine?" Robert laughed. "She won't. And even if she did, what's she going to do? She's 58 years old with no job, no money of her own, and no skills beyond making pot roast and tending roses. She needs me." Margaret stood frozen in the hallway, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle any sound. "The children are on board?" the stranger asked. "Completely. They understand that protecting the family wealth is paramount. Margaret would give half of it away to her Bleeding Heart charities if she had any say." "Which she won't." "Which she won't," Robert confirmed. Margaret backed away silently, returning to the kitchen. She was arranging groceries when Robert emerged with his guest, a lawyer by the look of his expensive suit and predatory smile. "Margaret, perfect timing. This is James Whitman, our new estate attorney." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Thompson." Whitman's handshake was firm, dismissive. He'd already categorized her as negligible. "Likewise." Margaret smiled warmly, playing her part. "Can I offer you coffee?" "Tea?" "No need. We just need your signature on a few documents." Robert produced a stack of papers, dense with legal text. "Just routine updates to our trust structure, for tax purposes." Margaret took the pen he offered, noting how both men watched her with barely concealed anticipation. She pretended to read, her eyes scanning the text. Hidden among the legalese, she found it. She would be signing away her rights to all major assets, leaving her only a modest maintenance allowance that Robert could revoke at any time. "This seems complex," she said mildly. "That's why we have James," Robert said, his tone patronizing. "You don't need to understand it all, sweetheart. Just sign where the flags are." Margaret looked at the signature lines, then at her husband of 32 years. He was already pulling out his phone, probably texting Catherine about dinner plans. She signed every document. "Wonderful." Whitman gathered the papers quickly, as if afraid she might change her mind. "These will be filed tomorrow." After he left, Robert kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture that smelled of cologne and victory. "I'll be late tonight." "Don't wait up." "I never do any more," Margaret said quietly. Robert paused at the door. "What?" I said I won't wait up. He left without another word. Margaret stood in the empty kitchen, then picked up her phone and called Grace. I signed them, she said when Grace answered. Margaret, why? Because now he thinks he's won. And when someone thinks they've won, they get careless. Margaret smiled at her reflection in the window. Besides, you can't steal what's already been moved. What have you done? Did you know that, as the account administrator for our family phone plan, I have access to saved passwords? Robert uses the same one for everything. Thompson, 1963, his birth year. Margaret, I didn't take anything. But I did make some interesting discoveries. Offshore accounts, hidden assets he didn't declare in those papers. The IRS might be very interested. This is dangerous territory. So is betrayal. Margaret's voice hardened. They want to leave me with nothing? They want to treat me like I'm already dead? Fine. But I'll take them all down with me. She hung up and went to her garden, where the roses needed pruning. The thorns pricked her fingers, drawing blood, but Margaret didn't stop. She cut back each bush ruthlessly, knowing that sometimes destruction was necessary for new growth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Papers all signed, Dad's asking. Margaret typed back, everything's taken care of. Another text, this one from Michael. Family dinner Sunday? Dad wants to celebrate the new business structure. Wouldn't miss it, Margaret replied. She looked at her bleeding fingers, at the pile of dead roses at her feet, at the house that had been her prison disguised as a palace. Sunday dinner. They wanted to celebrate stealing her life while she served them pot roast and smiled. Margaret went inside and opened her laptop. The IRS website loaded slowly, its form for reporting tax fraud intimidating in its complexity. She began filling it out methodically, attaching the documentation she'd gathered about Robert's hidden millions. But that was just the beginning. She pulled up Tom Morrison's email and began typing. Tom, I've been thinking about our conversation. I have information about the Henderson project bid that might interest you. Robert doesn't know that I know about the bribes to the City Planning Commission. Shall we discuss over coffee? Margaret. The response came within minutes. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Regent Cafe. We have much to discuss. Margaret smiled, the expression sharp as the thorns that had drawn her blood. Sunday's family dinner would indeed be a celebration, just not the kind they expected. 2 weeks had passed since Margaret signed away her rights, and November had arrived with unseasonable warmth that left everyone unsettled. The trees clung to their leaves as if refusing to accept the changing season, much like Robert clung to his illusion of control. Margaret stood in her kitchen at 5 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning, the turkey already prepared and waiting. But this wasn't just any turkey. She'd ordered it specially from the organic farm that Robert had always mocked as overpriced. 28 pounds of free-range perfection that had cost more than her old monthly grocery budget? She'd paid with the credit card Robert didn't know she'd opened, linked to the account holding 6 months of rental income from their Colorado property. The dining room table was set with the wedding china, crystal glasses catching the early morning light, 20 place settings instead of the usual 6. Margaret had invited everyone who mattered, not just family, but witnesses. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom Morrison, package delivered to all parties as discussed. Board meeting at Henderson Properties scheduled for Monday. Good luck today. Margaret smiled, arranging the centerpiece of white roses she'd bought to replace the ones she'd pruned. These had no thorns. She'd removed them all herself, one by one, until her fingers bled. The pain had felt like penance for 32 years of blindness. You're up early. Diane's voice came from the doorway. She'd stayed over, claiming she wanted to help with cooking, but really serving as Margaret's emotional anchor. Couldn't sleep. Margaret adjusted a place card. Catherine Sullivan, seated right between Robert and Jennifer. Too excited about our family celebration? Diane picked up another place card. James Whitman? You invited Robert's lawyer? Among others, Patricia Hendricks from the Foundation Board, 3 members of Robert's country club, his business partners, even Detective Riley. The detective investigating the Henderson property bribes? Margaret's smile was serene. Such a lovely man. Recently divorced. I thought he might enjoy a home-cooked meal. The kitchen timer chimed. Margaret pulled out a tray of her famous cinnamon rolls, the smell filling the kitchen with false comfort. She'd made them every Thanksgiving for 3 decades. This batch looked identical but contained a special ingredient, the truth, printed on paper and baked into the center of each roll. "Margaret, what did you do?" "I gave everyone what they deserve." Margaret began frosting the rolls with practiced precision. "Robert always says we should be grateful on Thanksgiving. I'm helping him appreciate what he has, while he still has it." By noon, the house hummed with preparation. Margaret had outdone herself. 2 turkeys, 7 side dishes, 3 kinds of pie. The kitchen looked like a magazine spread, and she'd dressed the part in her best dress, the sapphire blue one Robert had bought her years ago when he still noticed what she wore. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. Jennifer and David arrived first, Jennifer carrying a store-bought pie that she'd clearly grabbed last minute. "Mom, you look nice," Jennifer said with surprise, as if Margaret's appearance was an anomaly. "Why are there so many place settings? I thought we'd make it a real celebration. Your father's business success, your engagement, Michael's promotion. We have so much to be thankful for." David shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thompson, about the wedding." "David, your parents aren't coming, are they?" Margaret asked innocently. "I sent them an invitation, but—" "They're in Europe," David said quickly, but his eyes darted away. Margaret knew the truth. She'd had coffee with David's mother last week. The woman was horrified by what Margaret had shared about Jennifer's knowledge of the affair, her callous texts about her mother being dead weight. Michael arrived next, checking his phone constantly. "Mom, did you send some kind of email to the office?" "Dad's been getting calls all morning." "Just Thanksgiving greetings to his colleagues." "I thought it would be nice." The greetings had included documentation of Robert's fraudulent billing practices, sent from an anonymous email but with enough detail that only an insider could know. The IRS would be very interested in the discrepancies. Robert came down from his office, his face flushed with anger. "Margaret, did you—" He stopped, seeing the children. "We need to talk. Privately." "After dinner, dear. Our guests are arriving." And they were. Patricia Hendricks entered with the bearing of a queen, her eyes already suspicious. The country club members followed, then business partners, each looking puzzled but intrigued by the unexpected invitation. Detective Riley arrived in a suit instead of his usual rumpled sports coat, bringing wine and questions in his eyes. And then the door opened one more time. Catherine Sullivan stood on the threshold, young and blonde and holding a bottle of champagne like a peace offering. She wore a Tiffany necklace that caught the light. "You invited her?" Robert's voice was strangled. "Of course. Catherine's been such an important part of our lives this past year, it seemed wrong to exclude her." Margaret took Catherine's coat with perfect hostess grace. "Catherine, you look lovely. Is that a new necklace?" Catherine's hand flew to her throat. Yes. "It's beautiful. Robert has such good taste in jewelry. Don't you think so, Jennifer?" Jennifer had gone pale, her eyes darting between Catherine and her father. "Mom!" Oh, Jennifer knew all about Robert's taste in jewelry. She was there when he bought it. "Weren't you, sweetheart? At La Bernardin last month? You were at the next table with David." David's head snapped toward Jennifer. "What?" "It's not— Mom, stop!" "Stop what? Telling the truth? On Thanksgiving?" Margaret guided everyone to the dining room with the practiced ease of a conductor directing a symphony. "Please, everyone, find your place cards." The seating arrangement was strategic chaos. Catherine between Robert and Jennifer, Detective Riley across from Robert, Patricia Hendricks next to James Whitman, who'd arrived looking confused and defensive. "This is insane!" Robert hissed, grabbing Margaret's arm. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face with cold precision. "Remove your hand, or I'll have Detective Riley do it for you." Robert let go, his face reddening. The room had gone silent, everyone watching. "Please, sit," Margaret said warmly. "I'll bring out the appetizers." She served the cinnamon rolls first, watching as people bit into them, found the papers baked inside, each one personalized. Jennifer's contained screenshots of her texts about the inheritance. Michael's held his emails discussing how to hide assets from his mother. Robert's included photos from a private investigator showing him with Catherine over the past year. "What the hell is this?" Robert stood, the paper crumpled in his fist. "Evidence," Margaret said simply. "Diane, would you bring out the turkey?" Patricia Hendricks was reading her paper, documentation of how Robert had embezzled from the Thompson Family Foundation. This is fraud." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "It is." Detective Riley had pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. His paper had contained information about the Henderson property bribes, things only someone with intimate knowledge of Robert's business could know. "Mom, please," Michael's voice cracked. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Margaret began carving the turkey with surgical precision. "You thought I was stupid. Simple, disposable. That's not—" "Basically just a housekeeper at this point," Margaret quoted. "Your words, Michael. From the family group chat you thought I couldn't access." Catherine stood to leave, but Margaret's voice stopped her. "Sit down, Catherine. We're just getting started. You can't make me—" "No, but Detective Riley might be interested in your involvement in the Henderson bribes. You did process those payments after all. Your signature is on every document." Catherine sank back into her chair. Margaret served the turkey as if nothing was wrong, placing perfect slices on each plate. "Jennifer, would you like to tell David about your plans? The ones you discussed with Michael about hiding assets in offshore accounts?" David pushed back from the table. "I'm leaving." "His parents already know," Margaret informed Jennifer. "I had tea with his mother last week. Lovely woman. She was shocked to learn about your character. The wedding is off, I believe." Jennifer burst into tears. "You've ruined everything." "No, sweetheart. You ruined everything the day you decided I was worthless except for what you could inherit." Margaret's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she served. "You sat at that restaurant, watched your father with his mistress, and thought about money instead of your mother." "The papers you signed," James Whitman said suddenly, his face pale. "They're worthless if you can prove coercion and fraud." "Oh, I can prove much more than that." Margaret pulled out a folder from the sideboard. "Copies of everything. Hidden assets Robert didn't declare, offshore accounts, tax evasion going back 5 years. The IRS has it all. So does the state attorney's office." "You vindictive bitch," Robert snarled. "Vindictive?" Margaret laughed, the sound sharp as crystal breaking. "I gave you 32 years. I gave up my career, my identity, my dreams. I raised your children, kept your home, turned a blind eye to your late meetings and weekend conferences, and you repaid me by planning to leave me destitute while you started over with someone young enough to be your daughter." She turned to Jennifer and Michael. "And you, my children. I carried you, nursed you through fevers, celebrated your successes, comforted your failures. I loved you unconditionally, and you conspired to rob me while calling me dead weight." "We didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Margaret's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face. "You meant every word, every cruel text, every calculated lie. You looked at me and saw nothing but an obstacle to your inheritance." Detective Riley stood. "Mr. Thompson, I think you should come with me. We have questions about the Henderson property." "This is Thanksgiving dinner," Robert protested. "Yes," Margaret said, "and I'm thankful. Thankful I finally saw who you all really are." Patricia Hendricks was on her phone speaking rapidly. "Emergency board meeting. Yes, tonight." The country club members were recording everything on their phones. By tomorrow, Robert's reputation would be destroyed. Catherine tried to slip out, but Margaret's voice stopped her again. "Your apartment lease is in the company name, isn't it? The one Robert's construction company pays for? That's embezzlement. You might want to start packing." "We're your family," Michael pleaded. "You can't do this." "Family?" Margaret shook her head. "Family doesn't plot to destroy you. Family doesn't celebrate stealing your life's work. Family doesn't call you worthless." She stood, still holding the carving knife. "I spent weeks planning this. Not out of hatred, but out of heartbreak. You teaching me I was nothing taught me I could become anything. So I became your worst nightmare, a woman who knows her worth." "What about the money?" Jennifer sobbed. "We'll have nothing." "You'll have what you left me. Nothing. Except I actually have something now. The rental income from the Colorado house, the settlement Tom Morrison paid for the information about Robert's illegal practices, the book deal I just signed to tell this whole sordid story." "Book deal?" Robert's face went purple. "The Thanksgiving Revenge, a memoir. They're already talking movie rights. Emma Thompson is interested in playing me." Margaret smiled through her tears. "Turns out my story has value, even if my family didn't." One by one, the guests left. Detective Riley escorted Robert out in handcuffs. David left without looking at Jennifer. Catherine fled to pack her things. The business partners departed, already calling lawyers. Patricia Hendricks promised a full foundation audit. Finally, only Jennifer and Michael remained, standing in the wreckage of the dining room like lost children. "Mom," Jennifer whispered, "what are we supposed to do now?" Margaret looked at her daughter, 30 years old, beautiful, educated, and completely helpless without other people's money. "What I did when I discovered your betrayal. What I should have done years ago." She began clearing the untouched plates. "Learn to survive on your own. You're our mother." "I was. But mothers are people, not doormats." "You forgot that." Margaret handed them their coats. "I'll be selling the house. I've already found a cottage by the lake. Small, but it's mine. Bought with money I earned." "You can't just abandon us." Margaret paused at the door. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm freeing you, and myself." They left, and Margaret stood in her empty house, surrounded by the feast no one had eaten. Diane emerged from the kitchen where she'd been waiting. "You did it." "I did. How do you feel?" Margaret considered. Empty, full, broken, free. She picked up a glass of wine. "Like I've been dead for 32 years and just woke up." "What now?" "Now?" Margaret looked around the house that had been her prison. "Now I live. For the first time in my life, I actually live." The grandfather clock chimed 6 times. Outside, neighbors were gathering for their own Thanksgiving dinners, families coming together in gratitude and love. Margaret had destroyed her family today, but she'd saved herself. She raised her glass to the empty room. "Happy Thanksgiving." The wine tasted like freedom. 3 months later, Margaret's cottage by the lake was small but perfect. She'd planted a new garden, wildflowers this time, not roses. They grew however they wanted, untamed and free. The divorce had been brutal, but quick. Robert's hidden assets meant Margaret got more than he'd planned. Jennifer had married David anyway. His parents had relented, but Margaret wasn't invited to the wedding. Michael worked at a different firm now, his reputation damaged but not destroyed. They didn't call. Margaret didn't expect them to. She was writing now, her memoir becoming something larger, a manifesto for invisible women everywhere who'd given everything and received nothing. The reviews called it devastating, empowering, a battle cry for the forgotten wives. On another Thanksgiving, a year after the dinner that changed everything, Margaret sat alone at her small table. The meal was simple, a roasted chicken, some vegetables from her garden, a glass of good wine. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, then saw it was an unknown number. "Hello? Mrs. Thompson? This is Sarah Chen from the Austin Women's Shelter. We received your donation. It's incredibly generous. We'll be able to help so many women start over." "That's all I wanted," Margaret said, looking at the lake through her window. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. After she hung up, she returned to her meal. The chicken was perfectly seasoned. The wine was excellent. The silence was peaceful rather than empty. For the first time in her life, Margaret Thompson was grateful for exactly what she had, herself.